Before we begin, here's a question to sit with. Have you ever been removed from a room? Not because you were not good enough, not because you made a mistake, not because the numbers said you should go, but simply because someone else was uncomfortable with how clearly you belong there? Drop your answer in the comments as you listen. Connor Reed had built his company on the principle that decisions should be driven by data, not by emotion. He broke that principle once. On a Thursday afternoon in April, he called his best-performing department head into his office and told her that her position was being eliminated. He used the language of restructuring. He used words like strategic realignment and organizational evolution and said all of it without once looking her in the eye. She left his building that afternoon with her box of belongings and her dignity completely intact. He went home to his fiancée and said nothing about what it had cost him. 18 months later, he walked into a board meeting and found her sitting at the table. Not as a guest, as the new chair. There is a specific kind of wrong that is worse than cruelty. The wrong that comes from weakness. From a man who knows what the right thing is and chooses the comfortable thing instead. From someone who looks at what is true and selects what is easier to say. Cruelty you can name. You can point to it. You can say, "That was the thing that was done to me, and here is who did it." But weakness dressed as a business decision, that is harder to hold. Because the person who did it will spend years telling themselves it was necessary, that it was not personal, that these things happen in business all the time. She did not spend a single day believing that. She knew exactly what it was. And then she got back to work. If you have ever been the most capable person in a room that decided it did not want you, this story is for you. Before we begin, right? She became the boss anyway. In the comments if this story reaches something true in you today. Now, let us begin. Connor Reed had built Reed Ventures the way men of his particular generation and temperament build things. Through genuine intelligence, relentless work ethic, and the specific confidence of someone who has never once had to wonder whether the room was built for him. Chicago-raised. The son of a real estate developer father and a mother who sat on 3 nonprofit boards, and whose social fluency had given Connor an early education in how rooms worked and who was expected to occupy which part of them. Northwestern on legacy and merit in roughly equal measure. A top-of-class graduation. Years in finance before founding Reed Ventures at 34. 47 now. Reed Ventures was a mid-market growth equity firm. 19 portfolio companies across technology, consumer goods, and professional services. Not the largest firm in its space. By most accounts, one of the most consistently well-run. The kind of operation that attracted attention not through scale, but through the specific quality of its decisions. He was proud of that reputation. He had also, in a single Thursday afternoon, done more damage to it than 18 years of careful building could entirely repair. His fiancée's name was Courtney. She had entered his life at a charity auction 14 months ago. Beautiful, socially connected, effortlessly polished in the way of women who have been groomed for these rooms since childhood. She made his world easier. She knew the right people and said the right things and fit the visible requirements of his life with a precision that Connor had, at the time, confused with compatibility. He proposed after 9 months. The engagement had not improved her confidence. It had concentrated her insecurities into a specific target. Zara Mensah had not been looking for validation when she joined Reed Ventures 3 years ago as head of portfolio operations. She was looking for a challenge worthy of what she was capable of. 32 years old. An economics degree from Howard University and an MBA from Columbia Business School funded through scholarship, part-time work, and the particular determination of someone who understood that no one was going to hand her what she was capable of earning. For years before Reed Ventures at a strategy consulting firm, where she had built a reputation for the specific skill of looking at a struggling company and identifying, with surgical precision, the 2 or 3 things that needed to change and the order in which to change them. She brought that skill to the portfolio, and the results were impossible to argue with. In 3 years under her operational leadership, 7 portfolio companies had significantly outperformed their projections. 2 had gone to successful exit. 1 had moved from near collapse to the firm's single best-performing asset. She was the reason the firm's reputation for decision quality had strengthened in the past 3 years. She was also the reason Courtney had started making comments at dinner. It had started small, the way these things always start. Zara's name at the office too often. A late meeting running past 7. A presentation Zara had led that Connor had described with a specific kind of admiring precision that Courtney had noticed and filed and brought back at an inopportune moment. The comment at dinner was delivered lightly. She found it interesting how much time Connor seemed to spend talking about one particular employee. Connor said Zara was exceptional at her work. Courtney smiled and changed the subject. But the comment had been made. And in Courtney's world, comments were not the end of conversations. They were the beginning of campaigns. The campaign lasted 6 weeks. Courtney was not obvious about it, far too intelligent for obvious. She worked in the space between suggestions and implications, in the particular language of a woman who understood that direct demands about a subordinate employee would produce resistance, while carefully placed doubts would produce something considerably more useful. She mentioned boundaries. She mentioned optics. She mentioned the particular vulnerability of a newly engaged man whose professional proximity to an attractive and ambitious younger woman might invite the wrong kind of speculation from investors and partners. Once a week for 6 weeks. Connor resisted for 5 of them. On the 6th, he called his CFO David into the office and said he was considering a restructuring of the portfolio operations function. David looked across the desk with the expression of a man who knew exactly what was happening and had the professional judgment not to say so directly. He asked about the business rationale. Connor provided one: thin, functional, technically defensible. David nodded and said he would prepare the paperwork. The following Thursday, Connor called Zara in. She arrived the way she arrived everywhere: prepared, present, completely at ease. She sat across from his desk with a notepad and her usual professional readiness, and he told her that her position was being eliminated as part of a strategic restructuring of the portfolio operations function. The decision had been driven by the firm's evolving needs. It was not a reflection of her performance. He hoped she understood. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she asked directly, "Was this actually about the restructuring?" "A business decision," he said. She told him she knew what her numbers looked like. She knew what the portfolio had looked like before she arrived and what it looked like now. The decision had been made, he told her. She looked at him for one more moment with the specific expression of someone who has understood something completely and has decided that the understanding is enough. Then she thanked him, stood, and walked out. She did not raise her voice. She did not make it harder than it needed to be. What she said to him, quietly, at the door, with her hand already on the frame, was simply, "I hope it was worth it, Connor." She walked down the corridor. She collected her things. She left the building. He sat in his office for 40 minutes doing nothing. She did not collapse. That evening, she called her closest friend Priya and told her what had happened with the specific, compressed directness of someone who had processed it enough to report it clearly. Priya said a great many things on her behalf, which was exactly what was needed. Zara listened. She received what Priya was giving. And then she said, "I know, but Monday I am going to get back to work." Priya asked what work. She no longer had a position. "The work I was always going to do," Zara told her. This was a detour, not a destination. She meant it completely. Sunday evening, she opened her laptop and started writing. Not a complaint, not a record of what had been done to her. A business plan. 12 months earlier, she had been developing an idea on the edges of her operational work at Reed Ventures, a specialized portfolio advisory firm focused on the operational transformation work. She did better than almost anyone in the market. She had kept developing it quietly, in the hours that were hers. Now all the hours were hers. She did not rush. She did not overcorrect. She built it the way she built everything. From the foundation up, with the specific patience of someone who understood that what was built correctly did not need to be rebuilt. The firm was called Minso Advisory. It launched quietly, 6 weeks after the Thursday firing. The first client was a mid-market consumer goods company whose CEO had heard, through a mutual contact, that Zara Minso was available. The second came from a referral from the first. The third came from a portfolio company COO who had worked with her at Reed Ventures and who had spent the intervening months waiting for a reason to call her directly. By month 9, she had 7 clients. By month 12, the revenues were significant. By month 15, she had hired for consultants. By month 18, she was the most talked about operational advisor in Atlanta's mid-market investment community. And at month 18, she received a call from the board of Reed Ventures. Midpoint question for you. Have you ever been removed from something you built? and discovered that what you thought was your ceiling was actually just a door? The board of Reed Ventures had a problem. The portfolio operations function Connor had restructured after Zara's departure had not, despite the reorganization, restructured itself into something that produced the outcomes Zara had produced. 3 portfolio companies that had been on track under her leadership had significantly underperformed in the 18 months since. One had entered a restructuring process of its own. The board had been discussing the firm's operational leadership for 4 months. The name Zara Mensah had come up in that discussion repeatedly. Not because she was available, but because her results, measured against what had followed them, made the gap between her capability and what the firm currently had in that function impossible to ignore. When Mensah Advisory's growing profile became public knowledge in the investment community, the board chair, an older woman named Eleanor, who had sat on 4 boards over 30 years and who had the specific, unimpressed clarity of someone who has watched people make avoidable mistakes long enough to stop being surprised by them, had picked up the phone and called Zara directly. The conversation lasted 22 minutes. Zara asked 3 questions, and Eleanor answered all 3 with the specific, unvarnished honesty that made her someone worth having on a board. The board was offering her the chair, not a seat. The chair. Zara asked for a week to consider it. She used the week to review the firm's current portfolio performance data, which Eleanor had provided in full. She used it to speak with 2 of the portfolio company CEOs she had worked with previously. She used it to sit with the question of whether walking back into a building that had made a specific kind of mistake about her was something she could do with the clear eyes and complete professionalism the chair role required. She decided it was. Not because she had forgiven the mistake. Forgiveness was its own timeline, and she was on hers. But because the work was real and the board's need was genuine, and because she had built her career on the principle that the work was the thing, not the history attached to the room the work was in. She called Eleanor on Thursday. She accepted the chair. Connor arrived at the board meeting at 9 on a Thursday morning. There was nothing unusual on the agenda that had been circulated. Standard quarterly review, portfolio performance discussion, 3 items of governance. He took his seat at the long conference table. He looked at the door. He looked at the chair. The chair was empty. Then the door opened and Zara Mensah walked into the room in a deep green suit with the specific, unhurried authority of someone who had been moving toward this room for 18 months and who had arrived at exactly the right pace. She took the chair. The room looked at her. Connor looked at her. 18 months of not seeing her. During which time she had built something from the Thursday of her firing and turned it into the most significant advisory practice in Atlanta's mid-market and been offered the chair of his own board, arrived in the room along with her. She opened the meeting. Her voice was steady. Her agenda was organized, and the specific manner in which she commanded the room was the specific manner in which she had always commanded rooms, not with performance, with precision. She ran the first 30 minutes of the meeting without looking at Connor directly, not as a statement, simply as the professional reality of running a board meeting where the first 30 minutes did not require the CEO's input. When the agenda arrived at the performance review of the 3 underperforming portfolio companies, she looked at him directly for the first time. Her expression was the expression it had always been, composed, direct, entirely professional. She asked the questions the performance data required. He answered them. She noted the responses with the same precision she had brought to every operational conversation they had ever had. The meeting ran until noon. When it ended and the other board members were gathering their materials, he stayed in his seat. She stayed in hers. The room emptied. For a moment, it was just the 2 of them at a long conference table and the specific, charged quiet of a situation that contained more than the morning's agenda. She set her folder aside. She asked if he had a moment. He told her he had as many as she needed. She told him she wanted to say one thing, and then she wanted them both to move forward from it. What she said was measured and clear and without performance. She had processed what happened on the Thursday 18 months ago. She understood why it happened. She did not carry it as anger because anger required her to keep him at the center of a story that belonged to her, and she had chosen differently. She was here for the work. She expected him to be here for the work. And if he could do that, show up with the same standard of honesty and accountability the board required of the portfolio companies, they were going to build something worth building. He told her he understood. He told her he intended to do exactly that. Then he said one more thing, quietly, without the specific management of his words that he usually deployed in rooms where his authority was present. He told her firing her was the worst professional decision he had made in 18 years of building Reed Ventures. She looked at him. She told him she knew. Then she stood up. She picked up her folder. She said, "The board dinner is Thursday. Sit next to me. There are things to discuss that are not on the agenda." He said Thursday. She said yes. She walked back into the building. He sat in the corridor and understood that the most significant decision he had made in the past 18 months had nothing to do with a portfolio company. 6 months after Zara Mensah took the chair, Reed Ventures was doing the best work of its 18-year history. Not coincidentally, she brought to the board the same surgical clarity she had brought to everything. She asked the questions that needed asking. She pushed back when the numbers required it and supported decisions that deserved support and distinguished between the two with a precision that had always been her signature. The portfolio companies responded. The investors noticed. The firm's reputation, already strong, became something the industry discussed with the specific attention reserved for operations that have found a new gear. Connor was a better CEO under her oversight than he had been without it. That was not a comfortable realization. It was true, and he had the honesty to sit with it. The Thursday board dinner had been the beginning of something. Not announced, not declared. A conversation that went from professional to personal to somewhere quieter and more honest than either of them had been in a while. She had ordered the same wine she always ordered, and he had noticed, and she had noticed him noticing, and neither of them made anything of it except that the conversation went somewhere real. At one point she said, "I spent a long time being angry about what happened. Not visibly. I did not give that to the office or the work. In the private hours. At 2 in the morning, when the discipline relaxes, and you are just a person who was wronged." He told her she had every right to be. She said she knew. But she was telling him not because she wanted him to feel worse. She was telling him because she wanted him to understand that she had processed it completely and that what she was doing here now, in this chair, in this building, with this firm, was not about that. It had always been about the work. He said he knew. She asked if he knew what she had noticed when she walked into that boardroom the first time and saw him across the table. He asked her to tell him. She said he looked like a man who had been waiting to be held accountable for something and was relieved that the moment had finally arrived. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said yes. That was exactly what it felt like. She looked at him. She said that was the most honest thing he had ever said to her. He told her he was working on saying more of them. She picked up her wine glass and told him to keep working. 6 months after that conversation, Courtney was no longer in the picture. The engagement had ended quietly, on terms Connor had initiated and which Courtney had accepted, with the specific relief of two people who had been performing compatibility for long enough to recognize it simultaneously. He had not ended it because of Zara. He had ended it because of himself. Because the person who had made a wrong decision on a Thursday afternoon to keep someone comfortable was not the person he intended to continue being. One evening he arrived at a board dinner to find Zara already there, standing near the window with a glass of water, speaking to two of the younger portfolio company founders with the warm, focused attention she gave everyone. She looked up when he arrived and nodded, and he crossed the room and stood beside her and joined the conversation. Later she said he was different that evening. He asked how. Like he was not managing anything. She told him. He was not. It suited him, she said. He reached for his water glass. She reached for hers at the same moment. Their hands touched briefly on the table. Neither of them moved away. That was enough for now. Connor Reed made one decision out of weakness. He dressed it up as a business decision. He used the right language and filed the right paperwork and told himself the right story. But at the end of a Thursday afternoon in April, a woman who had done nothing wrong walked out of a building she had helped build because a man chose his comfort over his integrity. She did not collapse. She got back to work. 18 months later, she walked into his boardroom and sat at the head of his table and ran the meeting with the complete authority of someone who had been building toward exactly this. Not as revenge, not as a statement, just as the next correct step in a career that had never stopped moving forward. He had thought he was removing her from his world. He had simply redirected her toward a larger one. And the most powerful thing she ever did to him was not take the chair. It was come back to the work anyway, without bitterness, without performance. just excellence, which had always been the most dangerous thing about her. Final question for you. Have you ever been removed from something you had earned and discovered that the removal was not the end of your story, but simply the moment the real chapter began? Leave your answer below. Your voice belongs in this conversation. If this story found something real in you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. One share. It costs nothing and means everything. I love you all. I will see you in the next story.